Hi, I want to welcome good afternoon to our podcaster friends. I'm Podcast Pete, and in the studio, I have a friend that we just figured out we have a skill, and we wanted to really talk about that skill because it does come up in the business world, and it's something that, if captured, I think it's a special secret sauce that a lot of people don't even realize they have. So, Matt, introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and who you serve from a standpoint that our viewers can understand a little bit about our conversation.
All right, let's see if I can get this right. Well, my name is Matt. I'm really from everywhere. So if I have a strange accent from anyone who can actually tell accents, it's kind of all over the US. What I do is kind of anything under the sun. I'm a jack of all trades and traits, I would say too, just because in the skill that we're talking about today, it's kind of anybody who has this kind of has that same skill set.
Yep.
But at the same time, for vocation, I'm in sales, which is kind of odd.
Well,
my skill set.
It's funny because a friend of mine, we talked about being dyslexic, that we're always figuring out solutions, and our brain kind of goes to the solution part of things. So, but however, we gravitate sometimes to the sales part because we're communicating that.
Yeah.
When did you kind of like that day where you went, man, I think differently than somebody else? What did you like get diagnosed? Did somebody tell you, or did you figure it out? How did that happen?
It was actually a very young age. I would actually say the first time I really noticed it was in kindergarten. This was a very long time ago for me. However, I distinctly remember working on a little project that the teacher assigned us, and I was just kind of doing my own thing. And all of a sudden, my teacher said, "I'd like you to stay after." And being a kindergartner, you're like, "Okay, that's great, but I don't get to go outside. That's fine, whatever." Then my mom comes in. I'm like, "Oh, I'm in trouble now." And the teacher said, "Okay, look at all these projects that the kids did." And my mom goes, "Well, where's Matt's?" And she goes, "Look up." And mine was the only one on the ceiling, and it was a 3D because it was one of those where you had to like have it kind of suspended to see it.
Yeah.
And my teacher goes, "He's a special one. He thinks differently." And I was like, "Okay, so I do think differently, but what does that mean?" And fast forward a few years, I was around fourth grade, that kind of went to the doctor, and they were like, "Okay, well, not necessarily a doctor, but it was a one of those learning disability classes, and they diagnosed me with a dyslexic and ADD." Now, being in the 90s, that was kind of a new thing, and so they were not really any good medications out for it, and didn't like any of them anyway because it made me think a certain way, which that made me feel kind of clouded. So I would say very young age is kind of, I would say that's what really helped me in my journey with dyslexia. If I didn't have that, I would have been kind of lost and going, well, why am I this way? Am I messed up? And plus me being a third middle child, which is, second middle child. Anyway, that's a different story, but we often get left in the background, which that's where dyslexia shines, because you're not being told, micromanaged, I would say, to go anywhere. And so you kind of have this ability to just, I'm going to think my own way. I'm not going to let anybody else, ruin that. However, you do have a disadvantage in being able to just pick up a book and read. Granted, the power to learn how to read in your own way is far more exceeds anyone showing you how to read, because then once you read, you kind of forget the words on the page, and your whole mind goes in a different direction.
Right.
So if you're sitting there trying to read a sentence and you're reading the thing over and over again, and each time you read it, it says something different, that basically just means that you've got the special dyslexia.
Yeah.
And that's a good stuff.
I've heard people say, like, do you have auditory or written? And I was like, that was probably a few years ago. It was, and so did they ever communicate that to you? Like, you have this type of dyslexia?
So I have a mixture of three of them, three out of the four, I believe.
Mhm.
It's number, auditory, and letter. So
Okay.
basically, letter and number are kind of separated in their own little way because numbers deal with a different type of language.
Mhm.
However, in mine, reading the words in itself, the letters don't mix around, the words do. So they will dance around the page like they're in some sort of ballet. And fighting the ability to read that way is, well, not fighting, finding the way to read is difficult. But once you get it down, it's magical, because with ADD you have to follow the there's a word for it. It's a chemical your brain releases, and you're able to
endorphins or dopamine.
Dopamine. There we go.
Okay.
Follow the dopamine. And
okay.
so whenever you're reading in dyslexia, your ADD and dyslexia are fighting each other, and you're kind of just reading the pages.
Yeah.
It allows you, once you get it down, you have to find something that allows you to follow the dopamine, and then that will at least help you find the interest in writing and reading. And that's
what did you, well, I'm curious because I have some discussions with people, but never back and forth like we're having here today.
Yeah.
And when Deborah, we were talking, and I always like to listen to how people grow up and the different challenges they face. And I remember distinctly when I saw when you put together that saw in your house, and you kind of like, and I'm going like, I didn't think of it that way, but then I always, once I find out something, I go back to where I hear these different clues about how people think and process information. So when it comes to solving problems, what did you find is your dyslexia enabled you to do, or what really kind of, can you tell versus, because you obviously cannot flip it on and off, you are who you are, but at what point in after fourth grade, let's say you get out of school, because you're trying to figure out where is this going to work, what was your thoughts like? Am I like so different, I got to find something that can harness those talents?
Honestly, I didn't realize I was solving problems, because I felt school in itself, it was not very conducive for someone with dyslexia, because you have to fit in a box into every school class. And to me, I just figured, oh, this is something I have to do. So it was like a chore, and I just got through it. But whenever I was doing anything else, it's not that I was looking for a thing that where my dyslexia would actually would shine. It was just something that I did. So my parents aren't very tool oriented at the house, so they don't really fix a lot of things. Not to say that they can't. It's just, it's not their forefront. My dad, he was always on the road. He worked for IBM for 35 years, and he was always he was in the technology area. My mom, she's a good prayer warrior. And she loves praying. She loves doing all that fun stuff of, just kind of closing the door and just being on her own. Granted, whenever a light goes out, sure, a light bulb can be changed, but whenever that light bulb doesn't change, or not change, but when it doesn't work and you have to fix something in there, it's like, oh, it's broken, let's just hire someone to fix it. Well, that never happens. And so me being someone who's like, I have to have that fixed, I need that fixed, I'll just find a way to do it. Now, what the problem solving happens is the tools that my dad had were from like the 60s and the 70s. I mean, we had a hand crank drill. We had we had maybe a handful of screwdrivers, and none of them were Phillips. They were all flatheads, and I kind of think that's where I got my hatred of flatheads. But at the same time, I would always find a way to make a tool to fix something, because being a 10, 11-year-old, you don't sit there and go, well, is there a right tool for this? Dyslexia, you have to make the tool yourself. If it's either in your head or in physical world, you have to figure out how to do it, because no one's sitting there going, oh, you're having this problem, well, this is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And with dyslexia, it's everybody sees the world completely different, and
Right.
as you're looking at it, what they're saying doesn't line up with what you're seeing. So you're just like, you know what, I'm tired of trying to ask a question that they'll
Mhm.
understand, so I'll figure it out myself. And if you, as a dyslexic, if you don't understand why someone's not listening to you
Mhm.
or hearing you, it's because they just don't understand. And so
Right.
that, like, if you find out at a young age, like I did, finding out that trait of being able to like solve your own problems
Mhm.
saved everything, because I didn't really understand I was solving my own problems. I was just trying to figure it out. So I made tools when I was a kid to change lights. I mean, I didn't
Mhm.
realize that electricity in itself was deadly, because it's not that I didn't uh, fear it. It was
Mhm.
more of, I understood I have to turn off the power, because if I don't, then the shock will happen to your hands, and that's not a comfortable feeling.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just as you go, it's by trial and error.
Mhm.
And the trial and error is actually a very powerful tool for a dyslexic, because after you do a few trial and errors, you start to see the answer before you even start the problem.
Right.
And that's kind of helps a lot of dyslexics, because especially in algebra, I'm jumping
Mhm.
around, I know that, but in
No,
algebra, I would
it's
always
interesting
get in
to-
trouble constantly
Right.
for solving the problem without showing my work. And they would say, well, why aren't you showing your work? It's like, well, because that's the answer. It's like, well, we'd realize that, but where's the work? I was like,
Yeah.
it's in my head. And they, that's,
Did you feel? I totally. Did you ever like reading directions? Was that not something you would do? You would just get in there and fix it and do it?
yes. Directions themselves were sometimes something that slowed you down,
Mhm.
especially whenever reading in itself is an annoyance as
Right.
opposed to getting somewhere else. So if it had pictures with very little words, it's like, oh, okay, that helps. I know what that piece is for. But a lot of
Mhm.
times I would literally put the direction to the side as an assistant, kind of just sits there. And it's like, okay, if I
Mhm.
need it, I'll look at it. But I would never sit there and go, I need the instructions. I need to go step by step, because as I would
You-
solve problems, it would
Right.
just go.
Do you feel could you draw? Usually, it's hereditary, so it's either from a mom or a dad. Do you look back and can you see where it was passed down? Is it your dad or your mom?
It's definitely my mom's side.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
my dad is very logical,
Yeah.
very by the book. He's granted he is an encyclopedia. I
Hmm.
mean, he'll hear a tone and go, "Oh, that's from this song, blah blah blah, and from 1953. It aired at this time." And to me, that's almost slightly autistic, but
Hmm.
he's definitely not kind. He doesn't have that dyslexic trait. It's my mom that has that. She will sit there and she'll write something down, and it doesn't matter what it's always misspelled. It's always the B's are always D's, the
Hmm.
E's
Yeah. Yeah.
E's
Oh,
are
yeah.
always in a different direction, and you're
Yeah.
just like, okay, she's got the trait. However, I do know there are a lot of things that kind of mix together, but a lot of people say that I'm a perfect mix of both my parents. And
Uh-huh.
granted, if you see a picture of my mom and me, I look like my mom. If you see a picture of my dad and me, I look like my dad.
Right.
And all the other kids, they don't have that kind of mixture. And I don't know
Hmm.
how DNA works, but it's definitely, I have the ability to remember things, but only visually. So if I hear something, it's going to go one in ear. Wow, there's the dyslexia, in one ear and out the other.
Right.
And it's kind of frustrating a lot of times whenever someone's like, I've told you this 4 times. It's like, did you write it down?
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
do I have
Totally.
it physically to see it? And
Yeah, I think the processing. I'm thinking as you're talking here, how the similarities kind of weaving in. There is a lady that lives here, and it was, I don't know the exact time, but her son's dyslexic, and he actually works at administration at Grace Point, which is in town. And she said she didn't know she was dyslexic until recently, like maybe the last year or so. So, she always felt that he thought differently because of his being dyslexic. And, society, like you said at the beginning, you're not fitting into that mold. So you're a different mold. I think I remember you saying at the beginning, you did not go the Adderall or the Ritalin route. Did you not feel pressured by society and what this is the route that a lot of people take? Or did you just not enjoy being on it?
So a little bit of both. I would say the doctors kind of played a little guess and check with me, because at the time there wasn't a whole lot of options, and so they gave you a certain, or at least gave me a certain amount, and it did the exact opposite of what they wanted. So they tried another one, and it seemed to work, but I didn't like what it did on me. But everybody was like, let's put you on this. No, I would rather figure it out than mess with my brain, mess with the chemicals in my body. And it is definitely one of those things where I've discovered later on in life, I tried to do it again because of metabolisms, everything else changes later on. So I tried it recently, and sure, it helps you get in a certain mindset and focus. But then once it drops off about an hour after you take it, you just have this horrible crash.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily matter how beneficial anything is. It's an hour's worth of work is not worth 6 hours worth of crash. It's just not that. And so granted, there wasn't a whole lot of pressure, but it was definitely one of those from teachers and other students. Why aren't you this way? Why can't you just do this? And why can't you just focus? I'm sorry, I'm not like you.
Yeah. Did you ever have any friends that were dyslexic that understood your thinking, or did you not really find that person that kind of understood you? What was that like? Because, as guys, you didn't go around going, hey, I'm dyslexic. This is, hang this big D on your chest.
This deck's untied.
Yeah, it's kind of that hidden thing that I know I felt it. But did you have a person that you guys would go, man, geek out on stuff because you thought alike, or not the case?
Not necessarily the case. Not knowing exactly what dyslexia was, but being diagnosed with it, it wasn't something that I announced, and not a lot of people that I knew had it. Nowadays, if you have a little snippet of it, they'll find it out and they'll say you're dyslexic, and everybody can kind of just understand each other.
Right.
Nowadays, it's a lot easier, but back in the day, when I say back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, it was not a lot of people that you could confer with. But I did find a lot of solace in my friends that I did have common interests with. I played a lot of D&D, a lot of video games, so card games, board games, bike riding, and this was like trail riding, almost hiking in a way, so mountain biking. And I had a lot of different friend groups that I could just kind of mold myself into, and that's a very strong ADD trait. But the dyslexic route was almost something that I tried to hide, but everybody knew. They weren't going to be like, you don't know how to say certain words, or you can't read very quickly. And it's not like that, because friends themselves would support. Back in the day, at least my friends nowadays still support, but it's back then it's not that they didn't understand it, it's that they didn't want to point it out, because they understood I have a difficulty, but I'm still their friend. So they just kind of are like, oh, it's just Matt. That's what he does. So there wasn't a whole lot of camaraderie in that. So,
ADD and dyslexic, I don't know, but I hear a lot of both of those together, which the ADD is that creative, chase a shiny object, always doing something. So staying focused on stuff that you're not interested in is tough. But when you're interested in something, you can focus no problem.
Yeah.
And in school, you take a variety of subjects of which half of them you like and half of them you don't. What did you do for the ones that you didn't like? Did you not just like focus on the other ones? How did you handle that, knowing that was your characteristic?
Let's just say, by the grace of God, I made it through. There was a lot of daydreaming, a lot of not even caring. I would fall asleep all the time in a lot of classes because it's not that it was boring. It's just that I had no interest in it whatsoever. And my mind would just shut off.
Yeah.
And when it come to test time, it's more or less, it's not that I learned by osmosis. It was, I've heard a lot of different things from a lot of different places. And so whenever I would see something, my ability to remember things that are written down really helped me through. Granted, when I say help me through, I skated by with C's. That the school in itself was only interesting to me whenever it actually started to apply to real life. So applied sciences, applied maths, applied Englishes, that's whenever I really started to go, okay, I understand this because there's an application to it. When it's just a regurgitate, or learn and regurgitate, that could not pay attention whatsoever. So in the short answer, I did not actually pay attention whatsoever.
Yeah. That's I hear it now more than I did. And when you look back, you always have a different perspective of things. I always found, and maybe I would like you to comment on this, that in the working world, which it's a set thing, like you got to be this, you got to have this, you got to have this. It's like very different, because most dyslexic people gravitate to their own business because they can do things that people can't do, and they're constantly solving the business issues there, where if you're in the working world, they want you to do it a certain way. Did you find that to be the case in your career, that you were kind of in the wrong lane with the wrong company at times?
The only time that would really kind of rear its ugly head like that would be in sales. Before I did sales, I did a lot of service and repairs. I even worked for a company for 7 years called CPR, Cell Phone Repair. That to me was a place to where I could literally just wake up and do my job. It wasn't anything that, I wouldn't say it was hard. It was more interesting to me. So the difficulties actually made it more interesting. In sales, it was more as if a lot of people want something done a certain way, because the A-type personalities that were running all of the finances, a lot of the inside sales, it's like, oh, it has to fit in this sort of mold in order for it to actually go through, because our system does this. Now it's even worse nowadays because everybody uses computers. So if it doesn't fit in the system that was written, it's not going to go through. And so you really have to sit there and go, okay, can't you just understand that this business, they do a system this way and they do a system this way, and they don't actually meet. And a lot of times that kind of opened a door for me to shine a little bit, saying I can solve this problem. But the problem is they're so in that lane of, I'm only doing my job because it's in this lane. They don't see it as a solution. They see it as more work to do.
Right.
And in a corporate world where numbers and time it's money, anytime there's someone that's not in R&D, they see time wasted not on the next project. It's nothing they want to touch. So I would say,
totally agree.
Yeah, sales in itself is definitely the only place, but being the salesman, I think it's more or less, I can solve that problem firsthand, as opposed to saying, okay, someone else solve it, I'm just gonna move on to the next thing. It's like, well, no, we got to solve this problem before we hand it off, because if not, it's not going to go through. So I guess.
No, that's really interesting, because I found similar, different roles, but similar, that's I never could go through the regular path. So it was always a different path, which created a different mindset. Did you? I know I suffered from the esteem thing because you're constantly getting beaten down by regular society. Did you have an outlet? Like, did you do things that would kind of build that, like a hobby? Or I know I play golf and sports and things because I hated, academics. What was your outlet that you found yourself gravitating to?
I would say mine were inventions.
Okay.
And I wouldn't really call them inventions. It was more of just like modifying already made products. I would say back in the, I would say early 2000s, before Bluetooth headphones came out, a lot of times they would have like the little earpieces that everybody would walk around with the shiny blue light on it.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want that. I want headphones that plays music. And so I would literally take the earpiece apart, find the cheapest pair of headphones, wire it together, find the chip to actually do the Bluetooth and kind of release the, I forgot what it was called. It was so long ago. You had to remove a resistor and then add a jumper to actually make it to where it would play through both speakers.
Oh, really?
As one.
Yeah.
And then you just put it in there and you listen to music on your Bluetooth. And that was way back in the day before MP3 players were integrated into phones. And this was it was just like something that I did. And I was like, okay, I was walking around with my little inventions and people just thought I was weird because they're just like, well, you're just got earmuffs on. You're not listening to music, and surprise, it's wireless headphones.
Yeah.
So, I mean, other than that, it was like, I would put highlighter fluid in lotion and hand it out to the girls that were going to the clubs and just laugh so hard because they'd go in little raves and their face would just light up because they would wash their, like, put lotion on their hands and rub their face. And then all of a sudden they've just got like war paint on their face once they walk in their race. It's hilarious. So much fun. But that was a major relief.
Yeah. Well, I think we do find activities of enjoyment and fun and different because you're always thinking of it differently than other people, where somebody just thinks of it this way. You're always challenging the different ways that something can happen. Did you feel like in just your engaging with the business part of, like, if I said to you, Matt, you could do anything in business, what would you want to do now that you kind of look back on that development of those skills? What would you want to do today if you could say, okay, this is what I absolutely would be love to do that would create an opportunity in that area?
I would honestly say my dream job, if this was a job, is technology consultant. Because every time there's some sort of technology that's out, there's a way to make it better. There's something that can go that if you just change this little thing, you can make millions off of it. And there's so many different little things that if you just added one thing or changed one little thing, granted, I know there's a lot of patents and laws in place to like allow you to, kind of weave through a little thing to where as long as it's 33% different, you can kind of copy it. The thing where real money is made is not copying someone else's work. It's finding a way to make something that is yours and only yours, to where in 10 years they might have thought about this.
Yeah.
And a lot of times Tesla is one of those companies that's like, let's just do it. Why not? Let's move along. Let's run this. Apple did it years ago, and granted now everybody else has got touchscreens on their phones that's kind of integrating. But the thing is, the ability to see a product for what it can be and not what it is, I think, is the most powerful thing you can do in any company.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a guy, he was speaking in our Kennesaw Business Association, and I've known him for about maybe 8 years. And you hear this, somebody was talking about technology, and he said, my technology, I have my own R&D department. And he said his R&D was rip off and duplicate. And it's like, but not what you think. He was saying like, make it a little better.
Yeah.
And so I think to that is like, you see something and you can make it better.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why dyslexic people gravitate to their own business, because they're always trying to make something better than what's out there.
Yeah.
What would you say? Are you into any of the AI stuff that's coming about? Have you like been intrigued by it, or what's your thoughts on that topic?
I would say it's a little bit of a love-hate. It really has given the ability for people to be extremely lazy, but at the same time, it allows us, those who are using it the way it was designed, allows us to really kind of go, oh, wow, this is a great way to accelerate our thinking, not necessarily replace our thinking.
Right.
And to me, that is where it can really work, especially in, I would say, in coding. That is the place where it really kind of needs to be, is not necessarily like rewriting your essays. It's, I've got this thing, I want it to do this. Can you write a code to allow it to do this? And that would save 20 hours of work.
Yes.
And granted, you could do that. And some people, they can do it almost just as fast as AI, because that's literally how their brain thinks. I just recently met someone that he's 21 and he writes code like it's writing a 500-page essay. He just types it out and hand doesn't even leave the keyboard. And you're just like, that's fantastic. That's incredible.
Yeah.
However, with someone like me that likes to invent things that are heavily coded, I literally, that's where my roadblock is. I cannot, being a dyslexic, I can't look at code and going, yes, that's where the issue is. To me, the whole thing looks like one letter that's the same thing. And it's like, I can't look at that. Granted, AI would benefit me. However, I don't trust AI in a way to where I can check its work. So that to me is where the kind of hate comes in, is I have a hard time trusting it.
You know, it's crazy that you say that. And I've had my partner is borderline genius and autistic. He self-describes his learning style is like way above me. So I remember about a couple of years ago, I mentioned that, and he goes, he kind of shrugged it off. Now he is an AI geek. I mean, he is dove so deep into it. He's actually teaching businesses how to save. He told me like either 5 or 10 hours a week by putting an AI model into their business and stripping away the productivity losses in certain areas. So he's using it in that way. And I know this is how I've used it, because if I had to write out, if I didn't have Alexa, I couldn't spell 3 words together. I'm constantly yelling at Alexa because I journal and stuff, and what the spelling, because when I was in school and they do lectures, I would be thinking, how's that word spelled? And then the professor is like on to the next thought. And it's like, my notes look like shorthand. But now I'll take a book, I'll plug the book, and I'll say, give me a summary of this book. And it gives me the summary. I read it, and then I read the book. So I'm kind of thinking what the book's going to be about. So it's kind of helped me stay more focused on what I want to get out of the book. And he just kept asking me, goes, Peter, you using AI? And I was going, no, not really. But I have it on my phone. So the last couple months, I've been just throwing these thoughts out there, and I get these summaries that are really helping me zero in on how I retain information. But, it's fascinating where it's going and where people are using it. What would you say, like, if you were talking to a 4th grader, like you're back in 4th grade, what advice would you give that 4th grader now that you've gone from 4th to, you're a little bit older in 4th grade? So what would you say to that person? Like, what insights could you give that 4th grader that was just like you, but in 4th grade, and now you have you can, what do you call it? You have the being able to look back, whatever that word is. Now, what would you say to that fourth grader?
Well, it's interesting. I would say it's not necessarily advice. I would more or less give encouragement, because that's the thing that's really lacking, is the encouragement of there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, there's something right with you.
Yep. I love that.
But as for like kind of helping in a way, because we don't actually have an instruction manual, a lot of people don't have that, but there's no roadmap, no instruction manual on how to actually be dyslexic and succeed. But I would say listen to your own instincts, because a lot of times if you've got someone else telling you how to do something, that's how they did it, not how a dyslexic would do it. So listen to your own instincts and trust yourself, because if you can't trust your own instincts, then I mean, you're actually putting yourself in a car that has one gear.
Yes. I love that. I mean, I think that's so insightful, because just the road ahead, unless you understand what you have, can be really rocky and with full of potholes, unless you realize that you really have the secret sauce of thinking differently than anybody out there. And thinking now, because we're being bombarded with information, is something that's so important. So your ability to think differently puts you in a separate category of value. And it's just that would be, I love that advice. I think that's so important for somebody to grasp and embrace their skill of dyslexia. And we talked about before you kind of on, is it has a negative connotation, like you're dyslexic. Oh, I'm sorry, or something like that. When you go, no, you don't have to be sorry. I'm glad, because I see the world completely different than anybody else. So how can people get a hold of you? Because I know people are going to want to say, I want this guy in my camp, because he thinks differently. He creates pluses things. I always like to say, you make things better. But how can people get a hold of you?
I'll get an email. That's
that one.
Best way to contact me is by email.
Okay.
And that in itself is kind of one of the things that, if it's not constantly in front of me, I'm going to move on. So if it's an email, it's written down, I can see it, it's there. That's the best way to do that. Awesome. If you give me a call, I know your voice, that's great, but it's going to be kind of hard to remember what we talked about unless it's written down. So
awesome. Now I want to be respectful of your time, because I don't want anybody at the church to be mad at me, because I kept you from going over there. We go to the same church, and we're moved into a new building, and Matt does all the AV, all the technical stuff and everything. So he's like the VIP needed to do things. So I'm going to let you leave now, but I want you to tell our viewers what would be the one thing that you would want them to take home from our time on this podcast.
Something that a boss told me a long time ago, as I was younger. He said, it takes a lot more people and a lot kind of, actually, let me see if I can get this right, because I'm doing this from memory here. It takes all kinds of people to make the world go around. And that's not just people that are making your life difficult. It's people that think differently than you. If we all thought the same, there would be no wars, there would be no fighting. However, there'd be no advancements. There'd be no music. There'd be no art. There would be no iPhones. We would all just think the same and kind of walk around the same and not think of anything. So if you come across with someone that thinks a little differently than you, listen. You'll probably learn something.
I love it.
And they'll learn something from you.
Yes, that I love that. I want to. That's so good. I love that. We got to put that in a quote or something because that is so important. So Matt, thank you so much for dropping off before you go over to the church and hanging out with our dyslexic people because I can see a few people are on. And look, if you want to ask Matt a question, you can do it in the comment section, or if you know somebody that's dyslexic that hasn't grasped the talent of that mindset, share this with them because I think the more people understand the secret sauce, the special skill of the dyslexic people, the better it is for business and where we're going with innovation and solving things and everything. So thank you, Matt. We appreciate
Thanks for having me.
you being here and sharing with our dyslexic community your story. But we'd love to have you back, and I want to discuss more about it
Yeah.
if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.